Hello, it's me, Captain Poopy Pants of Lost Astronaut Studios, creators of InputCandy, quite a library for handling input from keyboard, mouse, and controllers. I'm going to quickly take you through things here and show you how to use InputCandy. But you won't learn everything in this video, but you're going to get a good overview. So there's 2, and eventually there will be 3 InputCandy use cases. The first use case is if you just quickly need a single function, you can download InputCandy and locate InputCandy simple. And this single function returns an object that you can use to test for various states. It's pretty simple. It just has up, down, left, right, and A-B. So your NES style. And it combines multiple buttons into A and B, and it combines D-pad and other things into directionals. So not getting too deep into any one topic here, but there is this concept in InputCandy of a directional. That would be like WAS and D, the numpad, a stick, a D-pad or a directional pad, thus the name directional. But I want to point out that directionals are actually, as a feature, not necessarily the best way or only way to go. Because they also mean a combination of inputs which equals a movement pad. So I don't want to get too lost in that, but there is this concept. So when you first download this package, you have the main project. Go ahead and open that up. You're going to see that there's a scripts folder, in there. There are these different folders. ICUI is for the interface that I'm about to show you, and it basically does everything you need to have controller settings. InputCandy is the main functionality of the advanced mode, so the mode that allows players to customize inputs for each type of gamepad or the keyboard and mouse if they're using that. So generally you're going to be using InputCandy when you're doing things on a PC. It's mainly for helping PC owners. If you're doing it on a console, you don't need InputCandy because you know what kind of things are going to be plugged into it. But some consoles allow anything to be plugged into it, and that would be a use case for InputCandy. But if you know that you're only going to be plugging in, for example, X input controllers to a particular console device, then you don't need InputCandy. You just need to write for that device. And in fact, there's another library out there called Input, which you can find in GitHub, that is a great library for combining consoles and mobile devices. But if you want something that really takes care of a PC user who might have different types of devices, then InputCandy Advanced is for you. If you're a person who doesn't want to worry about input too much and is happy with up, down, left, right, A, B, then InputCandy Simple is a single function. You can just take it from our GitHub account and use it in your game. We'd love to be credited, but you don't have to credit us. But it would be great if you put like our logo, and there's plenty of logos provided in your title screen. Anyway, then there's support for reading and later querying the Sdl database. So there is a game controller database, which is literally a flat file database that contains all the mappings for all of the different types of controllers that are supported by Sdl. You might want to look into why you would want to use this, but we did provide a module that has Sdl database loading, and it's also got a loader that is done iteratively so that it doesn't freeze the entire screen, because it takes quite some time to load the entire database. Once it's loaded, you can then scroll through that database, locate a mapping that you want, and you can select it. However, it could cause a situation where the player can't control the controller anymore. And so there's some caveats to using it, but we have provided that. And perhaps in a later version, we'll solve some of the issues with it. But it seems like the SDL remapping doesn't really matter, because if you're using InputCandy Advanced and you're allowing people to select and change and customize their controller setup, then they don't need any remappings. So I just wanted to call that out. But it also does help you identify devices, but a lot of that's handled for you without needing to use this SDLDB module. But it is included and is part of the InputCandy Advanced, but it's turned off by default. However, when you load this sample project, it will show you the loading screen. However, the SDL mapping features are turned off. So when you're in the ICUI interface, you're not going to see them. Finally, there's just some utilities that are useful, like for rectangles and string manipulation, that it's used by the advanced library and by the SDLDB library. So you'll need these 4 things if you're not going to be using simple, or you just need this one thing if you're going to be using simple mode. And in fact, you can just copy this file and paste it into your game. That'll get you going on input controllers. But anyway, and another nice thing about simple is that it does include the keyboard. So you can have 2 players on the keyboard and however many controllers. All right, let's get started. I'm going to hit play now. So the sample project is not a game, but it is pieces that you can add to your game. So here we see the loading sequence that shows you that it's loading all of these different bytes from this file that's included. And once it's done loading this file, the red disk will turn yellow while it processes, and then green, signifying that we've loaded it. Okay, great. So now we're in simple mode, and this is the first thing. So I've picked up a PS3 Style Controller. It's a USB direct input controller, and you'll learn that there are actually 2 types of controllers. If you read the Yo-Yo Games GameMaker documentation about controllers, it does sort of mention this. And to make it a little bit clearer for you, basically all controllers were direct input until like the mid 2000s, when X input was released as a new standard. The thing is, though, that direct input in a lot of ways was much friendlier and more open, and it allowed more devices to be used on Windows. You can have up to 14 connected devices on Windows, but if they're X input devices, so they look like an Xbox controller, then they use the X input interface, and you can only have 4 of those. However, if you also have things like this PS3 style controller that I'm holding here, which frankly was very cheap, it's a very nice controller. It has dual shock, it vibrates, and it's just a great little controller. You can add 10 additional controllers like this. I've tested InputCandy with X input controllers that are PS3 style USB controllers that work on PCs, and I also have a like a SNES style USB iBuffalo controller that works. But anything but an X input controller is going to be a direct input controller. It's a little confusing. Even Steam doesn't fully understand this, because I guess in their minds, Microsoft came out with a new standard and that's what they're going with. It was very difficult for me to get my game listed on Steam with more than 8 players and indicating that I had full controller support. Now, one thing InputCandy doesn't do for Steam users is it does not support the Steam controller directly. But all of these work with Steam, and InputCandy does work, as well as GameMaker works, with remote play. However, remote play, as far as the speed of the streaming, there seems to be an issue with that. And I've noticed in the past podcasters who are streaming my games that are made in GameMaker, they've had issues being able to show my game and stream it or capture it because GameMaker causes their frame rate to go very low, and I'm not sure why that is. But anyway, back to what you're seeing on the screen. So, simple mode, basically I have two controllers connected. Were I to plug and unplug one of the controllers, you would note that it immediately disappears. So I'm going to unplug one now. So my PS3 Style Controller has been unplugged, and now I'm going to plug it back in. Okay, so you saw that it like hot swapped that, and because we didn't remove controller 1, it didn't reorder. And if I hit the square or the triangle key, there's A and B. And if I hit the X and the O button, or the X and the circle button, you can see that those are A and B. And if I hit triangle and circle, well, they're both B. And this is what simple mode does for you. The triggers don't work, the shoulders don't work, the D-pad works, and one of the thumbsticks works. Now let's see how that actually works. If I press up on the D-pad, I get up. If I press up on the stick, I get down. And there's a second stick, and that doesn't do anything at all. And this is just using the simplest, detection methods the GameMaker offers. So up, down, left, right on the D-pad works fine. But you can understand that some users may never touch that D-pad thinking they can use the thumbstick when they can't use the thumbstick without it being inverted. And that's just the way that, I've used this. If I pick up this X input controller right here, this is actually not a true X input controller. It is an Atari modern controller, which is an X input controller, but you have to put it in that mode. But if I use its upper left stick, up is down and down is up, just like on the PS3 controller. But if I use the D-pad, everything is correct, except the left doesn't work. And this is because it's in Atari mode and not X input mode. Let me briefly look how to switch Atari modern controller, switch to X input mode. Let's see. By the way, InputCandy also supports the Atari Classic controller and the twist operation. So, briefly, I'm just going to take a look here. Let's see. Wireless pairing, understanding LEDs, charging, compatibility. It's designed to work on PCs. PC mode. Yeah. Okay, so enter PC mode. Back and context menu. Simultaneously for 5 seconds. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it blinked. So that shows me that it did that. Now it's reconnected. And if we look in here, my PS... Oh, that's interesting. My PS controller does not register button clicks anymore. Great. Oh, wait. This one does not click. Sorry. All right. So up, down, left, right, on the... And then this is, of course, the wrong way. So that is now player 2, and it was before, I believe. Actually, I think it was player 1 before. I don't know, but... Oh, they're both... No, player 2. Okay, so player 1. So now this is an X input controller, which means it's just sending different signals to match that of an Xbox controller. So if I pull the triggers, nothing happens. If I hit X, it's A, Y is B, A is A, and B is B. If I use the left stick, nothing happens. If I press up and down on the D-pad, which is, by the way, in the right place, or the better place, or the other place, I can use that without an issue, and left does work now. So that's a little nuance to the Atari controller. But if I also use the left stick, I've got that inverted stick, just like I had the inverted D-pad, just like I had that for the PS controller. So, there's all these nuances, but this is simple mode, and people can pick it up and figure, bang some buttons and figure out how to play your game real easy, because there's only 6 commands they can send at any one time. You could write special things to detect the triggers and such and add that to simple, but you never know what you're going to get. So now that I have this in X input mode, let's go to the next screen. So if I click the word InputCandy in the lower right, it's going to go through a series of different screens, and each one is going to demonstrate a slightly different thing until we get to the ICUI and then to the game test. So let's go ahead and go to the next screen. So it says Diagnostics here, and we're describing all of the connected devices and all of their states all in one shot. So you can see that there is a keyboard and mouse. It's assigned to player 0 or player 1. So it's player index 0. And you see that there is a mouse and a was mouse. So we're keeping track automatically of the previous mouse movement. If I move the mouse, you can see that, if I click a button, I get a was held state for that button. And I can do that for the middle, and I can do that for the scroll wheel. So this is all happening kind of alongside of all of the other things that are happening. And when I use the diagnostics panel and I hit a direction, it actually does give me some force feedback. There is a little bit of a vibration when I'm hitting this. And the Atari's one is really smooth, I have to say, compared to the PS. But the PS one's pretty good too. So if I hit any button, it's going to vibrate my controller, indicating which controller is being held. So we've got, continuity here. If I hit B on the X input controller, it is gamepad, gamepad 2, but it's the number one. It's the number one device, 1 pound, 0 pound, and you can see it has the name X input standard gamepad. So it's not identified as an Atari modern controller anymore. It's identified as an X input standard gamepad. And up here, there's a Piranha Extreme, which is the manufacturer of these PS3 style controllers. And actually, this one doesn't have this one, but it doesn't have the vibrate, but it is working. And you can see the axes changing. Now, there's a lot of numbers there. I suggest you study these in detail and look at the diagnostic strings that are being, pumped out here. But basically, you've got the gamepad slot, which is not the same as its device number. The device number is managed by InputCandy, whereas the gamepad slot is that thing they talk about in the gamepad or GameMaker gamepad functions. The number of hats that were detected. Sometimes you have a joystick and it has a hat, which is like a D button or a D-pad rather, a directional. Then you've got buttons, 17 buttons on the Piranha. There's 4 axes, and the dead zones are set to 0 for everything by default. Then you've got the thresholds that are set for all the buttons, which is half down. Then you've got the gamepad slot, GP slot 4S. I'm not sure what the S... Oh, I'm sorry. There should be a space. So that's the same number as this. S is the sticks, maybe? Not sure what S is. Gosh, I forget. But B is button, H is hat, L is your left stick, and R is your right stick. So down here on the input, gamepad input, when I'm using that red stick on the Atari controller, you can see that it is affecting the values from -1 to +1 as I rotate that around for the left, and then the other stick controls the right stick, and that's correct. And in most cases, X input controllers are going to use those correctly. If I pick up the Piranha Extreme PS3 style controller, which, by the way, you can plug into a PlayStation and it will work, you'll see that there is a left, okay, and a right, and that's also correct. But it's not always correct. And especially on certain controllers, they're just weird. And like an example would be I have an N64 style controller that I have tested this with, and that one has 2 independent axes. I've also seen other weird things in other controllers, but if you really want to allow the player to take advantage of their controller, you need a way to customize. So anyway, this is the current state of the devices, the mouse, the keyboard, so I can hit different keys, and all of the active controllers. So it's a great way to get accustomed to seeing all the numbers at once. Let's go to the next panel. Now we're in the UI. So to give you some context, this screen would be shown to you after you clicked it, change controls or configure or game options in your game menu. And you can do this while the game is quote-unquote paused in the background or even still going in the background. This can be drawn over top of whatever's there. And it will affect it immediately. So, keep that in mind. Also, I don't know if I recommend or not. It's certainly a little extra work to do it that way. But you probably want to pause your game. There's just different things you can do there, and it's up to you. But this can be drawn over top. If you use the D-pad on any controller or a hat. So, for example, the Atari Classic controller, which is the new one, and it looks like this. Okay. I happen to have one, and if I plugged it in and if I moved the stick, you would think it would generate a directional pad movement, but it actually generates a hat movement. So hats can have an up, down, left, right, and so can this. So just letting you know that that also will control these menus. So you've got your back button here, and in this example, that will take us to a sample game, so you can play with the sample actions. The way that InputCandy works, and it's similar to other libraries, is that you create a series of actions that you then test for, and you give those actions default values. So, for example, A should always be fire. The game designer picks A as fire. Well, obviously somebody might come along and change that, so it's just a suggested default. Then the player can come in here and you can do a little bit of reordering. So let's say that Jim wants to use his favorite controller and he also wants to be player 1. So he selects the player 1 controller, which is currently using the slot 2 and also the keyboard. If I click this button, now I'm in this and I'm inspecting my setup and I want a different controller. So I can select from the 2 controllers, and I happen to be holding this one right now, so I'm going to click that one. Then I can come down here and we've got customize game input. But if I go back, you'll see that player 1 is now using the gray controller and this X input controller is being used by player 2. So that's solidified. Now, there's also settings, and settings are not changed automatically when you change your controller, but you can load them. And every setting that you create, because you don't want to go through the cumbersome and kind of pointless gesture of naming each setting, it names the settings by a number and also by the controller you were making the setup for. So if I come in here and I say customize gamepad input, if I don't like this profile but don't want to lose it, I can create a new profile. Or I can choose an existing profile. But since I don't have any profiles, I'm just going to edit this one right now. So if I keep hitting I'm hitting right, by the way, on the gamepad. Left and right, up and down, they all do slightly different things. But basically, the way this panel works is when you hit the right button, it's going to the next. So there's a little kind of like helpful loop in there, but basically left will get you all the way back to go back. And right will take you all the way down to the list, which is the last part. I know that doesn't make visual sense, but it makes sense to keep all the other controls bundled together, and I don't know. This is how it worked out. It had to be this way. I chose it to be this way, and send your complaints to our GitHub profile. But okay. Also send us your praise. So down here at the bottom, I have the ability to press a button, and I will change the axis dead zone from 0 to 1 here. Okay, and it does sort of force it to have a slight dead zone. This solves most problems, and 0.1 is a pretty good one, but you could have even 0.2, if you want. But you can't go back. You can only just go through the numbers. Same with button threshold, and frankly, you'll never need to change this value. Half is fine, but you could, if you wanted to be a hair trigger and a uber gamer, maybe you could try different button thresholds, but I suspect it's more of an on-off than anything else on most controllers. It would be a lot more money to put in a button that had some sort of velocity pressure sensitivity, but some do. Okay, then I've got up and down arrows on this long list, and you'll see that the list is the list of actions that the game designer, you, has chosen that will control your game. And you can see that there's defaults already set up. So help menu is the back button. Now there is no back button on this controller. And this leads me to another part where it looks like it works, right? Like it looks like jump is B and shoot is A and move is the D-pad. And all of this probably work. But in order to be absolutely sure, you can encourage users to, before they get to this screen, to go down to this test on input simulator button. And this will take you to a little screen that allows you to actually see what buttons you're pressing versus what they're detected as. So for an example, if you pull a trigger on left trigger on this Piranha Extreme, it's showing up as a left shoulder. And if I pull the left shoulder, it shows up as a trigger. Well, that doesn't make any sense, but at least now you know how you can reprogram it to be the right thing, or the thing that you prefer. Most people just feel through it, and so there is a way for you to just capture input. But you can see here, the left D-pad, and if I press the sticks, I can see which axes they are and what their values are, and I can do multiple of these at one time, and some the triggers are even axes. So there's lots of ways that you can use this to find out more about your control setup. And you can hold down a whole bunch of buttons at once and sticks and everything, and just find out. Click the buttons down, see if everything is registering the way it is. Now on this particular controller, if I hit the start button, it's start, and if I hit the select button, nothing happens. So it's important to realize that nothing is happening. And since nothing is happening, that means there is no back button on this. So if I wanted to reprogram this, I'm going to hold down a button for 8 seconds to get out of this screen. And now I can go up to customize gamepad input. And I can go over to the scroll bar, and I can scroll all the way to the bottom where there's a back button. And I can go back to the help menu. And I can click this, and I can select from list, or I can capture the input. But since no input was captured from the select button on this particular device, then I can't use that button at all. So maybe I want to use the right shoulder. But remember, on this controller, the right shoulder is not the right shoulder. It's the right trigger. So let me just click on the capture input button and pull the right shoulder that I want to use. And I'm just going to hold it until it's selected. I press release, and now I can accept this if I want this. Now, one of the interesting things that I've allowed input, or that I've worked into InputCandy, is that if you want, you can actually set up an or situation. So if you wanted either or the right trigger or the right shoulder to work, I can click capture input, and I can hold both keys down. And you can see it says and. That means I would have to press both buttons at the same time. Actually, when I released it, it said or. I'll have to look into why that's different, but you get the gist. Like, there's a way to select. Oh, I see. It was saying and before because you were holding this and that. And now that you've released it, it's telling you that it's going to set it up to be that or that. And this part, or, is set by the game developer. So whoever created the action, and by the way, actions can be loaded from a file, but whoever created the actions is the person who has set that as being an or and not an and. So there's a way to change that by setting up a combo. Anyway, let's click accept. Now, it said that there was a warning that inventory is using that. So it does allow you to multi-configure the same button. And that may or may not be a good thing, but let's go into that again. And let's go into select from list this time. By the way, the mouse also works in addition to using the controller. We're going to go select from list. And we're just going to go down this list until we find the right trigger. Up! Well, this happens occasionally. All right, let's regroup. By the way, we're at version 0.99 at this point, so this will hopefully be worked out fairly soon. And, I don't want to call it 1.0 until I know that every button works as best I possibly can, and every feature that I'm claiming at version 1 should be working, so it's a good solid version 1. There are some stretch goals that are minor updates, and there's a couple of questions about, do we want an entirely different way to go about this? But this is the most straightforward way I could come up with based on the conventions and the needs. So you can see here, we didn't get a chance to save our settings, so we're going to have to start all over. But it's not a big deal because I'm not going to go through all of that. So I'm going to select a different gamepad, and then I'm going to go in and customize the gamepad input. I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to demonstrate a couple of other things briefly. So I want to go down here to help menu. I'm going to avoid the bug by doing capture input this time, but I'll fix the bug. I'm going to pull the trigger, which is actually the shoulder. I'm going to get the button I want. All right, I'm going to accept it. Notice no warning this time. Okay, so now we've got this controller fully working with this game. So I'm just going to back out of this. All right, well, I know why these things are happening. It has to do with calibration, which I'm about to demonstrate. So that'll be fixed very soon. So I'm just not going to change the button this time, but it does work. Trust me, it does work. It has to do with, I had to change part of the structure around rotate, invert, and reverse, which I'm about to demonstrate what that is. So I had a friend who was playing a game with me, and he really wanted to reverse the thumbstick on this controller. So I'm going to go click this a few times, get back to our interface, go in here. I'm going to customize the gamepad input. He wanted to move with the thumbstick, and unfortunately the thumbstick was inverted. So there's another thing that happens in here, but I'll explain it after we've done it. So I go down here and I go to capture input. You want to advise players to move the stick until it is detected and then hold it in place for 5 seconds. Okay, now we've selected stick 0 plus 1. What does that mean? Well, 0 plus 1 means those are the axis numbers, 0 and 1. And it makes a unique stick with a combination. A combination of axes makes a stick. So if I press up and down on the left stick, it actually works perfectly in this environment where -1, which is up towards the top of the window, is up and 1 is down. Some games interpret 1 as forward. So there's a little bit of experimentation that has to happen here. And luckily they can come back in later and change the calibration. Also, you could provide an outside calibrator that allowed you to detect, press up on your direction pad, press down, and then you would figure out from those settings. So you can build settings separate and on top of InputCandy to handle some of these special cases. And if you're making like an aviation game and you want to give people the option of inverting that, that's another example of an external setting that can be a layer above all of these layered settings. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to go, instead of accept, which would accept it as is, I'm going to do save, then calibrate. Now I'm in the calibration panel and I can move this around. Now in this case, I'm actually okay with it. So I'm going to go back. Now let's try the other stick, which is slightly different. Again, with the idea that you can capture more than one thing at a time and make them both movement. So if I wanted, I could make left or right movement. So if I just move them both until they're both selected. Oh, didn't get it in time. There we go. Perfect. All right, now we've got an OR situation where you can move both. And one is up and down and the other is really weird because if I go up, it goes left. And if I go down, it goes right. If I go right, it goes down. If I go left, it goes up. Let's go ahead and calibrate this so that it is the correct direction. All right, so this one's fine. So I'm going to go to the next one and I'm going to play with it. And I see that it's actually exactly inverted. The first thing I'm going to try is rotate because remember, left was up and right was down. That makes no sense. Well, what's actually happened is that horizontal and vertical are mismatched. So this is how you swap them. And that actually fixes this stick. So it's perfect. But if I wanted to, I could then invert that so that down was up and up was down. And if I wanted to undo everything that I just did, I could also reverse L and R, and now it's messed up in the exact opposite way. But let's undo those two, and now we have a perfect. So rotate, or I've thought about also adding the word swap there, but it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you've tried it, and it's really about trying it visually while you're also making the change. So anyway, you don't really accept or click done on this one. It just made sense. You just go back, and it's already in place. Now, one change that's going to happen before version 1 is I'm going to put some indicators here that indicate that this one has been rotated. Maybe. I don't even know. It doesn't really matter at this point because the person has done the work and they've got, you have to move the mouse off if you're going to use the key or the gamepad, but they've already done the work. So there's really no point in them struggling further or seeing a bunch of weird symbols. It keeps it simpler because when they go and play the game, again, same bug, I'll fix it. When they go and they play the game, it's going to be what it's going to be. And if they don't like it, they can try the other, two commands or turn things on and off until they get what they want. I have had games that I think were made with GameMaker, or if not, with something else, Unity, that have had some of these controls in them. And some of them were actually very visually nice. I can't remember the exact game it was, but I played one recently where they had a really nice axis control, and you could do all sorts of different things in there. But no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to do what I wanted it to do. And I think InputCandy would have solved the problem there, but maybe not other problems. It really is a complex issue of input controls, and it's too bad that GameMaker can't provide you with something like this out of the box that's stylable, but InputCandy is stylable, and, I'm trying to keep it up to date. I do encourage people to go to the GitHub, join the project, and keep us up to date on your fixes, because I can't always be watching the pod as far as updates, although I am trying to keep it updated. I'd rather hear about it from somebody if I haven't noticed it. So please go there, make a pull request, suggest some code, or just make an issue and let us know if something's not working. And others, please join. Please test. Show me some weird controllers and how they interacted and how could we support those, especially flight sticks. I don't have any flight sticks. I do have an N64. I have several X input and some of these piranhas, and I have that SNES one, but I don't have anything else. Now, I don't know if I have the controller right here, but I'll demonstrate if I unplug the controller for the Piranha. You see it disappears, but it still keeps player 2 in the right place. And that's one of the harder fought features of InputCandy. Now, there also is no way to change which player uses the keyboard, but generally you can set that. There is a setting, but you generally don't want that to change. Now I'm going to unplug this X-Input programmed Atari controller, and I'm going to plug in an Atari Classic controller, and you can see it's already identified it with the right graphic. And, you know, it's cool. And we could have more drawings in there, but I only have a few. If I get up for a minute, I can go grab my N64 controller. Okay, you can see, by the way, there's a max players setting of 8, and I think that's a good place to start. Most people will choose based on their game and what they're trying to do. You know, they're gonna pick that based on the design of the game, because you have to write a lot around multiple players. It's not something that just happens naturally. But you can see here, now this controller is actually black, but I have a black and a blue one, so I have the blue one described there, and this one is probably the weirdest one of all, but the D-pad still works. And I believe the A button. No. Okay, it's the left. On the right D-pad left. Okay. Now, if I go down and test on Input Simulator, I can see what these map to. And I can see that the B button does nothing, but the A button does L trigger. And that makes sense because there's only one trigger on this controller. There's the R shoulder, and that's correct. And the L shoulder is also correct on this. The red button in the center, which says start, is start. Interesting. There is a stick. It calls it the left axis, but there is no other axis. And then there's the center trigger, and that registers as right. And I believe, yeah, and then, yeah, the A is left and the R is right. Interesting. So it'd be like, because it's like a pistol grip controller, and it can take some sort of a thing that you plug into it, some sort of a memory card or something. Anyway, it's an interesting alternative controller type for those who like N64s. This thing still works, even though it's not an N64 controller, but it's a retro styled controller. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. I'm going to pick up the SNES controller now, and you can see that none of the buttons work because it's not trying to detect those. So if I hold down a button on that NGS Phantom Retro Link N64 controller, I can get out of there. And then, oh wait, did I even plug this in? Yeah, it's plugged in. Weird. Let me get out of this. This controller just sucks. It's a Luxem SNES style controller. And I'm just going to have to go out and get myself an iBuffalo, because that thing didn't work. Oh, great. What's this? It's because I had it loaded up. All right, there's another bug. Glad we're finding them. All right. Trust me that they will be fixed. I just have to. I'm glad I have video knowledge of them. It gets kind of confusing as to what's fixed and what isn't after a while. But let me plug back in my original Atari X-Input style controller. It's an Atari modern controller in X-Input mode. And I'm going to just demonstrate the game part, which is the final screen. It makes no sense as a game, but it will let you test different things. So, again, if I go back here, okay, I'm in the game, which I could have just clicked to get to. Over here we have some spinning clocks. They don't mean anything. It's just showing you that you're in a game and time is moving forward. You see here that it says player 1 press jump, and that's so that you can start the game, because you need to be able to monitor whether or not a player has activated itself with the start key, right? So now I'm in the game, and if I use the D-pad, nothing is happening. Okay, but if I hit the A button, it makes a noise. If I hit the B, it makes a different noise. And I think that's all this game is. So it does seem to be moving in a direction, but I don't know that I'm doing that. Maybe I am. I don't know. Yeah, I do seem to be controlling the player a little bit, and I'm going down while holding the down axis. Oh, I'm holding both axis sticks. Yeah. Anyway, let me pick up the other controller. Hope it's this one. What's that one? All right. Well, there's a third bug. It looks like I have a lot of bugs. I'll just cut those out of the actual final video. But this has just been an overview. We're at version 0.9.8. And I'm hoping to get to version 1.0 very soon.